Welcome to The Explainer. I'm your host, and today, you know what? We're just going to bypass our usual introduction. We are jumping straight into a deeply, deeply unsettling explainer of the modern doppelganger phenomenon. We are going to completely dissect this primal human fear, and it's one that has evolved from whispered stories around ancient campfires directly to the glowing screens of our smartphones. Okay, let's dive right into this truly chilling account from a YouTube user. His security camera captured an absolute terrifying impossibility at 3 in the morning. And listen, this isn't some spooky campfire ghost story, right? This is a modern, digitized encounter. So this guy starts getting motion alerts from his front door at exactly 3:04 a.m. When he checks the footage, he sees himself, literally in his own pajamas, walking out the front door and down his driveway into the pitch black. But here's the kicker. His wife, who is a notoriously light sleeper, completely swore he never left the bed. So the absolutely crucial point here is trying to visualize this physical impossibility. I mean, it's just wild. To prove to himself that he was just, sleepwalking, the man sets up a second camera inside the bedroom, pointing right at his bed. Come Friday night, both cameras trigger. At the exact same second, the outside camera shows him just calmly walking down the driveway. But the inside camera, it shows him lying in bed, wide awake, eyes wide open, just staring at the ceiling. He is literally in two places at once. No way, right? And this physical impossibility totally echoes another terrifying modern case. Picture this. A 19-year-old guy is all alone in his kitchen at 2 a.m. during this massive, freezing Canadian blizzard. Out of nowhere, his grandmother and his girlfriend just walk in, and they are just staring at him with these unnatural, totally fake smiles. His grandmother warns him not to go outside. Then his girlfriend hugs him, but she feels ice cold and she smells strongly of a smoky campfire. After dropping this super cryptic warning about not messing with black magic, they just walk away, and the grandmother smiles and says, "See you on the flip side." Now the real horror? He goes back to his bedroom and finds his actual girlfriend sound asleep. She had never left the room, she was warm, and she definitely didn't smell like smoke. Section 1. Defining the doppelganger, the double walker. Let's get into it. So to really understand the sheer emotional dread of these modern anomalies, we've got to zoom out and examine the history. Look at the literal translation here. Doppelganger is actually a German loanword that translates literally to double walker. It was first coined way back in a 1796 novel by Jean Paul, and it basically describes a supernatural double of a living person. But here's the important part. It is almost universally perceived as a harbinger of bad luck or impending tragedy. It's not a friendly twin, it's an entity that essentially haunts the person it's doubling. And what's really fascinating is that this fear of a double spirit is a completely universal human experience across so many diverse cultures. Like the ancient Egyptians, they believed in a ka, a literal, tangible spirit double that holds your exact memories and feelings. In Norse mythology, they were terrified of the Vardoger, which is this ghostly duplicate that performs your exact actions right before you actually do them. Then you have the Finnish, who have the Etienen, a sort of first-comer spirit. And over in Islamic traditions, there's the Qareen, a spirit double of parallel temperament that lives with you and might try to persuade you into following your darker whims. So, you see, this isn't just isolated internet lore or localized myth. This is a global, deeply rooted psychological archetype. Section 2. Famous historical encounters, harbingers of doom. Because, guys, this isn't just ancient mythology. Some really prominent historical figures have recorded their own terrifying, very real brushes with the double walker. For instance, back in 1612, the renowned English poet John Donne was visiting Paris, and according to historical accounts from that time, he claimed to have seen an apparition, a literal doppelganger of his own wife. And this wasn't just some random trick-of-the-light hallucination. It happened on the exact same night that miles and miles away back home, their daughter was tragically stillborn. So here we see the double walker acting directly as a grim, undeniable harbinger of death and misfortune. And this grim reputation is totally cemented by the haunting final days of the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Let's trace this timeline. On June 23rd, 1822, Percy Shelley suffered this terrifying nightmare about a flood. And during this dream, he claimed to have actually met his own doppelganger. Well, just a couple of weeks later, on July 8th, that nightmare became reality. Percy Shelley tragically drowned in the Bay of Spezia in Italy. And then, a month later, his wife, the famous author Mary Shelley, writes this letter explicitly detailing Percy's horrifying encounters with his uncanny double right before his death. It's just bone-chilling. Section 3.
Freud and the Uncanny. Deconstructing the Dread.
Okay, so how do we intellectually deconstruct this intense psychological dread? Like, why does seeing our own reflection, walking down a driveway at 3 in the morning, completely break our minds? To answer that, we have to turn to psychoanalysis, specifically Sigmund Freud's profound 1919 essay, The Uncanny. And Freud actually starts his investigation not with psychology, but with linguistics. He dives into the German dictionary definition of the word Heimlich. Now, Heimlich usually means belonging to the house, familiar, tame, intimate, and friendly. It is basically the ultimate feeling of safety. But what Freud discovers next is absolutely fascinating. As he tracks the usage of the word Heimlich for familiar, he notices the meaning slowly shifts. It evolves into this weird ambivalence. Because think about it. What happens in the familiar, private spaces of a home? Well, things get hidden from the outside world, right? So Heimlich starts to mean concealed or kept from sight. And in doing so, Freud realizes this word for familiar actually merges with its exact opposite, unheimlich, which is the German word for the uncanny or the creepy. Basically, the uncanny isn't something totally alien. It's something deeply familiar that has somehow become terrifying. Now, before Freud came along, a guy named Ernst Jentsch theorized that the uncanny was just intellectual uncertainty. Getting creeped out by a lifelike wax figure simply because our brain doesn't quite know if it's alive or if it's a machine. But Freud completely argues against this. Freud says, no, the uncanny is the return of the familiar. He argues it's a frightening element that leads us right back to something we used to know deeply, or a childhood complex that we thought we had grown out of. And Freud builds this argument using the classic horror story The Sandman by E.T.A. Hoffmann. So in the story, there is this incredibly lifelike doll named Olympia. Now, Jentsch would say she is the main source of the uncanny fear. But Freud points out, actually, the real horror of the story is the Sandman himself, this completely terrifying figure who tears out children's eyes. Freud argues this dread isn't about intellectual uncertainty regarding some doll. The visceral dread comes from the deep fear of losing one's eyes, which Freud links directly to a repressed, deep-seated childhood terror and the castration complex. The uncanny hits us so hard, not because it's confusing, but because it strikes at something buried deep, deep in our subconscious. Section 4, The Psychology of Fear, The Return of the Repressed. Which brings us to the ultimate twist in our explainer today. We have all this global folklore, these historical deaths, and deep psychoanalytic theory. So why exactly do we feel such visceral, stomach-dropping dread when confronted with the idea of a modern doppelganger on a Ring camera? Well, Freud concludes that the uncanny arises when a primitive belief we thought we had completely surmounted suddenly appears to be confirmed by reality. Think about it. As modern, rational adults, we don't consciously believe in the Egyptian Ka or the Norse Vardøger anymore. We've supposedly outgrown those old superstitions. But when a guy looks at his security camera and sees a perfect copy of himself walking down the driveway, or when a 19-year-old hugs a freezing campfire-smelling duplicate of his sleeping girlfriend, suddenly, that primitive, ancient belief in the spirit double is violently confirmed by physical reality. The repressed belief returns, and the result? Absolute, paralyzing terror. Which really leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question to ask yourselves before you go to sleep tonight. We've seen just how ingrained the fear of the doppelganger is in the human psyche, and how our modern technology is now capturing what we honestly thought was just a myth. So, if your phone buzzed tonight with a security alert, and the thumbnail showed you walking out the front door into the dark while you were still perfectly warm in your bed, would you have the courage to actually look at the footage? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and well, as the doppelganger said, see you on the flip side.